Everyone remembers where they were when major events were announced. Almost no one remembers where they were when major events actually happened. Because this didn't happen on a stage. It didn't happen on television. While attention was consumed by conflict, speculation, and noise, something far more consequential unfolded quietly. No urgency, no drama, just execution. That's the pattern. The biggest changes don't arrive during chaos. They arrive during distraction. This wasn't rumor. It wasn't a leak. It was a move calculated, silent, and final. One that alters leverage, redefines power, and shifts the ground beneath the global system. And almost no one noticed. This is how real shifts signal themselves. Not with announcements, but with absence. In geopolitics, the most important moves are rarely meant for public consumption. They're meant for the people who already understand the language of power. Markets respond to headlines. Governments respond to pressure. But states, the ones that survive, communicate differently. They move quietly, through channels that don't trend, through actions that don't need explanation. Silence isn't confusion. It's cover. When there's nothing to see, nothing to comment on, and nothing to argue about, that's usually the point. Because by the time the story reaches the surface, the decision has already been completed. Silence is never accidental. 5,000 tons. That's the number. And before you try to calculate it, before you turn it into charts or prices or percentages, pause for a moment, because this number isn't meant to be understood mathematically. It's meant to be felt. 5,000 tons isn't a trade. It's not a hedge. It's not a routine purchase, timed to market conditions. It's weight, physical weight, intent made tangible. This much material doesn't move quickly. It doesn't move casually. It moves because someone decided it had to now. And when that decision is made at the state level, the number stops being about value and starts being about control. Sit with that number for a moment. If this were just about price, it would already be over. Traders would argue, analysts would debate, commentators would fill hours of airtime. But this isn't about silver going up or down. Silver isn't just an asset. It's a material, a component, a requirement. It sits inside the things modern economies need to function: energy systems, electronics, defense, infrastructure. You can speculate on paper. You can't substitute the physical. This metal doesn't represent wealth. It enables capability. This metal decides who can build and who can't. Markets didn't make this decision. Charts didn't. Traders didn't. This wasn't a reaction to volatility or a clever timing play. This was designed. State planners don't think in quarters. They think in cycles, in decades, in conflicts that outlast administrations and headlines. They ask different questions. Not what will perform, but what will still matter when systems are under stress. History is full of these moments. During wartime, governments didn't chase returns. They secured materials: steel, fuel, grain, metals. Whoever controlled inputs controlled outcomes. This move fits that lineage perfectly. This wasn't a trader's decision. Step back far enough, and the noise fades. What remains is the pattern. Empires don't fail when the fighting starts. They fail long before, when resources quietly change hands. Long before uniforms, before speeches, before flags are raised or lowered. The pattern is simple. Secure what others assume will always be there. Stockpile what seems boring, abundant, unthreatening. Do it early. Do it silently. It's been done again and again. The British Empire did it before the Second World War, locking up rubber and critical materials while rivals argued politics. By the time conflict surfaced, supply had already been decided. This has happened before. For decades, power was measured in barrels. Control the oil, and you controlled the world. That story is outdated. Modern warfare doesn't stall because fuel runs out. It stalls because components do. Guidance systems, sensors, electronics, the things that turn hardware into weapons. And those things depend on very specific materials. Silver isn't burned. It isn't consumed once. It's embedded inside missiles, inside fighter jets, inside satellites, inside the systems that keep modern militaries operational. Oil moves tanks. Silver makes them smart. This is what creates an industrial choke point, not a shortage you can solve with diplomacy, but one you can't substitute away. Missiles don't run on headlines. There's a moment when something physical crosses a line, and after that moment, it no longer belongs to the market. It belongs to geography. Once metal moves, it doesn't circulate the way money does. It doesn't flow back because price changed. It doesn't respond to incentives or press releases. It sits where it lands. Vaults don't leak. History shows this again and again. Assets that leave one sphere of influence almost never return voluntarily. They're locked in, reclassified, repurposed. What looked available yesterday is simply gone today. Not sold, not borrowed, not leased. Gone. And it isn't coming back. Money used to be neutral, a medium, a bridge between value and exchange. That changed the moment it was turned into a weapon. Accounts were frozen, reserves were locked, entire nations were cut off from the systems they were told were permanent and safe. What was once presented as infrastructure became leverage overnight. And that created a new rule. If access can be revoked, then access isn't ownership. If digits can be erased, then digits aren't wealth. When money stops working the way you were promised, you don't argue philosophy, you change behavior. So, the response wasn't political, it was practical. What do you do when money stops working? Power, in the modern world, lives on screens, ledgers, networks, software. Control is exerted with permissions, logins, and switches. And it works until something leaves the system. Digital power depends on participation, on compliance, on assets staying where they can be seen, tracked, and touched by policy. Physical ownership doesn't ask for permission. A bar in a vault doesn't need a password. It doesn't care about sanctions. It doesn't respond to updates or outages. Its value doesn't disappear when a server goes dark. This is the boundary most systems can't cross. You can't freeze what you can't touch. When supply disappears, it doesn't announce itself. There's no siren, no countdown clock. It feels normal until it doesn't. Think of it like a room with chairs. As long as everyone believes there are enough seats, no one worries. People move freely. They talk. They speculate. But if a few chairs are quietly removed, nothing changes at first. The room looks the same, until the music stops. And suddenly, what mattered wasn't price or preference, it was proximity. Who already had a seat, and who assumed there would always be one. This is how real shortages form. Quietly, invisibly, irreversibly. What happens when the music stops? The most dangerous weakness in any system is the one it doesn't know it has. For decades, the West built its power on visibility, on data, on flows that could be tracked, modeled, and managed. If something mattered, it showed up on a screen. If it didn't show up, it was assumed to be irrelevant. That assumption worked until it didn't. In 1971, the United States closed the gold window, ending the promise that dollars could be exchanged for real metal. On paper, the system continued. Confidence remained. Markets adjusted. But something fundamental broke that day. Physical reality overruled financial confidence. This is the same blind spot repeating itself. They didn't see it because they couldn't. A war economy doesn't care about balance sheets. It doesn't reward efficiency or growth. It doesn't follow the rules people are taught in peacetime. In a war economy, priorities flip. Liquidity becomes fragile. Paper assets stop behaving like assets and start behaving like promises, promises that only work as long as everything else does. Stocks assume stability. Bonds assume trust. Even currencies assume cooperation. Stress breaks those assumptions. When survival becomes the objective, the system rewrites itself. What you can hold matters more than what you can claim. What you control matters more than what you're owed. This is the moment when rules change without permission. Paper only works in calm weather. What looks like coordination from the outside often isn't planned in a single room. It's alignment. Different players responding to the same pressure in the same way. When trust erodes, systems reorganize. After the collapse of Bretton Woods, the world didn't vote on a new order. It drifted into one. Old anchors failed, new ones emerged, trade routes adjusted. Alliances realigned, not because of ideology, but necessity. The same process is happening again, quietly, incrementally, with no announcement required. Manufacturers look for certainty, states look for security, resources move toward whoever treats them as strategic, not symbolic. No announcement was needed. The consequences always show up somewhere first, not everywhere, not all at once. Pressure finds the weakest joint and starts there. In this case, it's Europe, an industrial system built on imported inputs and tight margins. A region that planned its future around energy transitions, advanced manufacturing, and just-in-time supply chains. Those plans assume materials arrive on schedule, at predictable prices, from dependable sources. When that assumption breaks, factories don't collapse dramatically. They slow. Orders delay. Costs creep higher. Components become hard to source. Shortages don't arrive screaming. They arrive as excuses. Shortages always arrive quietly. Beneath the surface of every market sits an agreement that no one likes to think about. A promise that if paper is exchanged, the real thing can be delivered. Most of the time, that promise is never tested. Contracts are rolled. Positions are netted. Settlement happens on screens, not with trucks or vault keys. As long as confidence holds, the machinery keeps moving. But stress changes behavior. When too many people ask for delivery at the same time, paper meets reality, and reality doesn't negotiate. Metal either exists where you need it, or it doesn't. That's the trap, not volatility, not price swings. The moment the promise is called, paper promises don't survive delivery. There's a point when the people with the most information stop explaining themselves. They don't go on television, they don't argue on social media, they don't try to convince anyone. They act. Smart money doesn't seek permission or applause. It moves first and explains later, if it explains at all. Because explanation invites competition, and competition raises cost. That's why the loudest voices are rarely the most important ones. The real signals aren't speeches or forecasts. They're withdrawals, reallocations, quiet accumulation. When words and actions diverge, believe the actions. Watch what they take, not what they tweet. Every shift reaches a moment like this. A moment where the path splits, and neither direction feels comfortable. There's no clear signpost, no guarantee, just a quiet realization that standing still isn't as neutral as it used to be. On one side is familiarity. Systems you've known your entire life. Assumptions that have always worked until they don't. Staying put feels safe, not because it's proven, but because it's familiar. Because everyone around you is still standing there too. Familiarity creates consensus, and consensus feels like protection. But consensus has a habit of forming at the wrong time. On the other side is adaptation. Questioning things you were told not to question. Reevaluating beliefs that once felt settled. Accepting that the environment has changed even if the screens, the rules, and the language haven't caught up yet. Adaptation doesn't feel heroic in the moment. It feels isolating. It feels early. It feels uncomfortable. And that's usually how you know it matters. History isn't shaped by the people who see change coming and debate it endlessly. It's shaped by those who adjust before adjustment becomes common sense. Before it's approved, before it's praised, when it still feels unnecessary to most. This is the moment they always talk about later. The moment where it could have gone either way. Indecision doesn't freeze time. It doesn't preserve options. It quietly chooses for you. Because time keeps moving, whether you move with it or not. Doing nothing isn't neutral. Doing nothing is still a decision. Windows don't slam shut. They don't announce themselves. They don't come with a countdown or a warning label. There's no bell, no final headline, no moment where someone tells you, this is the last chance. They close quietly after enough people assume they'll always stay open. That assumption is what makes them dangerous. As long as access feels permanent, no one feels urgency. People delay decisions. They wait for confirmation. They wait to feel safe. But safety is usually just familiarity wearing a disguise. By the time change becomes obvious, it's never early. It's already priced in, already allocated, already owned by someone who moved when it still felt uncomfortable to do so. That's how real transitions work at this scale. Not as single events you can point to, but as processes you only recognize in hindsight. They move slowly enough to ignore right up until they move fast enough that ignoring them becomes expensive. First, nothing seems different. Then small things stop lining up. Then explanations stop working. And finally, the door you assumed was open isn't. This isn't about timing the exact moment. It never is. It's about recognizing when conditions are changing beneath the surface, even while everything on top looks familiar. This isn't a prediction. There's no date attached to it. No dramatic reveal waiting in the future. It's an observation. The shift isn't coming. It's underway. And moments like this don't repeat themselves once they pass. This was your notice. This isn't a call to panic. And it isn't an instruction to copy anyone else's move. Panic is loud. Panic is reactive. Panic shows up late and pays the highest price. What matters now isn't fear, it's awareness. This is an invitation to think differently about what you're watching and what you're not. Most people are trained to look where the noise is. Breaking news, market flashes, urgent headlines that demand attention after something has already happened. Systems are built to explain the past, not warn you about the future. Reality doesn't wait for permission. It moves first, quietly, without asking to be seen. The people who stay ahead aren't necessarily smarter. They don't have secret information or access to closed rooms. They're simply paying attention to different signals, not words, but behavior. Not announcements, but adjustments. Not what's being said, but what's being done. Question: what's presented as permanent? Nothing that relies on confidence alone lasts forever. Be skeptical of systems that only function when everything goes right. Systems that break the moment stress is applied aren't stable, they're fragile. And fragility always reveals itself too late for the people who trusted it blindly. Watch what happens off camera. Watch what happens without commentary. Watch the moves that don't require public justification, because they already make sense to the people making them. That's where real change begins. The most important shifts rarely arrive with urgency. They arrive quietly. Then suddenly, they're irreversible. So don't chase the story after it breaks. By then, the advantage is gone. Stay curious. Stay observant. Stay ahead of the silence.